Can you figure out the secret? Oh, they don't look so bad. I had my eyebrows done. and they're a little and they're a little dark, and I'm a little vain, but I don't have any eyebrows. So I got me some eyebrows, and I thought I can't do Zoom, but see, they look better than they do.
They're gonna like.
They don't look so bad. Okay, all right. I'm so vain. That's what it is. That's why they sing that song to me at every party we have. She's so vain. All righty. Good morning to everyone. And I thought we would talk about we're as sick as we are secret, and that how kept secrets make us sick. And you know, it's just sort of a given that addicts of any sort that we keep secrets, but you know, most people have some skeletons in their closets.
Wait a minute. You went away. Hold it. She went away.
Okay, can you hear
Are
now?
you back? I don't know what happened.
Can you
I
hear?
see her still now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Are you ready?
You're back. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so a lot of families, most families have some skeletons in their closets and things that they only talk about behind closed doors. And, you know, I think for normies, you know, people that aren't addicts, you know, they can have their secrets and they can keep their secrets. But, you know, for those of us that have any form of addiction, secrets are deadly for us. Now, we don't have to tell the whole world everything about us, but we need to have at least one safe person. You know, and we're so fortunate in a 12-step program that we have something called sponsors. And, you know, Bill W. called Ebby, who took the message to him. You know, they didn't even call them sponsors back then. What he called Ebby was his beloved, because Ebby was the one who took the message to him, and he called him his beloved. And because, you know, Ebby planted the seed of recovery in Bill's brain, and, you know, and God fertilized it, and I mean, he absolutely found recovery in a flash of light. So secrets are, you know, it's something that is held really deep inside of us, and we avoid a lot of times revisiting those secrets. And you know, and what is usually going on with a lot of us, y'all may not have this, but you know, I know being in the addiction field in as long as I have, and I know when I first went in, and I can still experience this. You know, and I've been in the field over 40 years, but every once in a while I think, one of these days they're going to catch on that I don't know anything. You know, and that's called that imposter syndrome. We think that we're just imposters, and one of these days everybody's going to find out the secret that we don't know anything, that everything we know we're making up. And that's the mind of, I don't know if normal people do that, but I know a lot of addicts, and I know a lot of addicts that have had that same syndrome. So, you know, a lot of times the secrets that we deal with is, well, and what's a secret is, it's a Latin word that means set apart from, separate. And, you know, when we're keeping that a secret, we do feel set apart from. And that's why with clients who come in, we really encourage them to, first thing we have them to do is to write an autobiography. And you know, be as truthful as they can, and a lot of times they'll get real truthful, and then throughout their treatment they'll add a little more to it, and a little more to it, and a little more to it, because there's so much shame surrounding secrets. And then you couple that with if there's been any form of childhood abuse. any form of childhood abuse, but particularly sexual abuse. It can be so deep-seated, a lot of times people won't even remember. They won't remember the abuse, but the body does. And through good therapy and treatment, a lot of times those secrets are revealed. But I think it's a real God deal that those secrets are not revealed until the person is capable of facing the truth and working through them. And so sometimes those secrets pay off that we don't know the whole truth at first. But then through recovery, it's really important that we seek the truth, because the truth will set us free. You know, when I was working at the Drug Alcohol Treatment Center in Abilene, and this has been really over 40 years ago, a little more than that, we had really just opened and really didn't, I really didn't know much then, I promise you. We were all just kind of flying by the seat of our pants. But I knew I went into the business in the first place to work with families. So we had this woman come in that brought her husband, and she had 2 children with her, but she brought him in for detox, and it was obvious that she had been beat up. So we got him in detox. I brought the family, and it was a little boy about 10 and a little girl about 4. And children are taught early on how to lie. And so we got in there, and it was, the woman was beat up. It was obvious. And so I got to talking with her, and her son, who was 10, spoke up and said, well, Mama fell down the stairs. And so she proceeded to tell about how she fell down the stairs. Now, if you really want to know the truth in a family, ask a 3, 4, 5-year-old. And that 4-year-old little girl spoke up and said, no, she didn't fall down the stairs. Daddy hit her, and Daddy kept hitting her and hitting her. Don't you remember, Bubba, we hid under the bed? Well, she told the secret. But the 10-year-old had already been taught how to lie and how to keep those family secrets, you know. And I will tell you, that whole family, and it wasn't anything that I did, it was absolutely a God deal. But I kept working with that family, and that treatment center did not want me to work with families. They wanted me to strictly work with the alcoholics. So I would sneak around and work with family members, because I knew, you know, I grew up with an alcoholic mother and a rageful, sick father, and I knew the importance of working with the children early on, and really didn't have much training in it other than on-the-spot training of growing up in a dysfunctional home. And so that particular family, and I've seen many, many, many thousands of people recover through the years, but that particular family, I guess it's been probably 10 years ago, I had been asked to speak at a conference that we used to have in Abilene over Labor Day, and I was speaking as an Al-Anon. And when I got through, this man came up, and he had 2 or 3, I'm about to cry, 2 or 3 little kids with him, and that was the 10-year-old son that was in that room that day. And he had never chose to drink. They live in one of the small towns around Abilene. He heard, I don't know how, but, well, he was a member of Al-Anon, and he heard I was going to speak, and he drove over and brought his family and to thank me, and I didn't need the thanks. It is a God deal. It's not me. Anytime I get to thinking I'm healing, that it's me, I got to better quit this job, because it is all a God deal, you know. And I've got a friend on here that works in the field, and he knows what I'm talking about. You know, we can't take any credit, because if we're willing to take the credit for people's recovery, we got to suit up and take the blame. So I'm not willing to take any credit or blame. We're just messengers. And but I thought that is the benefit of working with families early on. And I quit that particular treatment center and came and put in Shades of Hope. And one of the main reasons is so I could work with families, because I knew that this is a generational disease. It's a generational curse, and it goes from one generation to the other. But the good news is it can stop in one generation. It doesn't have to keep going on. And what it is addictions, eating disorders, process addictions, Now, kids may grow up in recovering addicts' homes, and they may go through a period of time of rebellion, and they may even drink a little, they may get into eating disorders, they may blah blah blah. But the thing about when kids grow up in a recovering home, those parents are on it. They watch them, they know what to do, and they're willing to to get them help. They're willing to let it play out, the disease play out, as far as they it is different when you grow up in a recovering home, because parents have tools. So getting back to the secrets, that little 4-year-old, if you really want to know what's going on in the family, ask the youngest child, because they don't know to lie yet. The 10-year-old had already started lying, he'd been taught to. And so what secrets do, it will cause a sense of isolation, in that sense of, there again, if those people ever find out who I really am, they won't want to be with me. And it can be emotionally exhausting to hide the secret, to keep the secret. I know as a kid growing up with an alcoholic mom, there was I don't guess they even had child protective services then. I don't think there was probably anything available for kids. I don't know. But I missed a lot of school because I stayed home and took care of mother. And I look back and I think if there had been a concerned teacher, a loving teacher, or someone that knew about addictions and, could have intervened and, to the point of maybe even getting me out of the home. But I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't be where I am today and that's sitting here talking with y'all. But it is, children need to be protected, and they don't need to protect the family secrets and carry those family secrets. And that's why we have Family Week. I like what Kim says, that we encourage the family to just throw everything out in the middle of the floor, get it out there where we can look at it, where everybody can look at it. I see it as a blanket that's covering up all of the dysfunction. And what Family Week is we begin to pull that blanket off and begin to look at it, and people begin to tell the truth. And when we can tell the truth in a safe place, what we say, the truth sets us free. Now, sometimes the truth hurts really bad, because if they're talking about you, and particularly, when they're confronting you, as long as we're talking about someone else, it's not as bad. But when we have to look at ourselves, but what keeping secrets do is a big part of mental illness. It can cause depression, it can cause anxiety. It doesn't cause addictions. Addictions are about brain and body chemistry, but it can sure contribute to it. It can sure help it get started. And they're taught to, and I was taught, this is the message that I heard: what happens in this house stays in this house. You don't go tell anyone what is happening in that house. And so, and I am going to be talking next week about adult children of alcoholics. But in the first book that I remember reading about adult children of alcoholics was from Claudia Black. And, she gave us the 3 rules of living in an alcoholic dysfunctional home. It's: we don't talk, we don't feel, and we don't trust. You know, you don't talk about anything that goes on in this home. Keep it here. And then we're taught not to trust anyone. And my dad taught me that. He's the only people you can trust is in this house. And, you know, that's the people that I didn't need to trust. That's where all the abuse, I mean, I'm talking about heavy duty abuse. And so it confuses kids. And then we're given the message, don't feel. There's nothing wrong here, so don't have a feeling about it. And, you know, I like, and I'll talk a little more about it next week, but Claudia Black, like I said, was the pioneer in the adult children of alcoholics movement. And she became a social worker. And there wasn't much taught in school about alcoholism back in those days or addictions at all. And what she did get didn't apply to her because, you know, there wasn't any, she didn't have a parent that was an alcoholic. You know, we say that denial is don't even know I'm lying. You know, and she went off to school, and she was raised up in North Washington State. And she said when she went back, her dad owned a bar. Anyway, long story short, the denial came off of her eyes, and she realized that she was raised in a severe alcoholic home. And it was her job to keep the secret about how bad Dad's alcoholism was. And they didn't even call it that back then. Back then, and it hadn't been that many years, people didn't call alcoholism what it was. Or today we call it substance abuse disorder. We don't even call it alcoholism anymore. It's called substance abuse disorder. But back then, they called it having a drunk in the family, just a drunk, you know, and that had a lot of negative, you know, we didn't know it was a disease. We just thought it was all just behavior problems. So I'm getting into next week, and but I am going to talk about adult children of alcoholics, and like I said, Claudia Black was one of the first pioneers in it, and then and I'll talk about some other pioneers, but in the early days here, many years ago, I had brought, when Claudia Black brought out her first book, I can't even remember the name of it, but anyway, I was at Hardin-Simmons University. I partnered with them, and we brought her here to speak. And that was the first time anyone spoke in Abilene, Texas about adult children of alcoholics. And then later on, she was, for a time, 6 months or a year, she was our program director or our treatment our clinical director. And we, you know, that was before Zoom and all of that, but we did it by phone. Every Thursday we would sit and go over our clients with her. And it's surprising when you work in the addiction field how many of the people who come through the doors of any treatment center have come out of alcoholism or come out of some form of dysfunction. You know, and it's not to blame parents. It's not a blame situation. It is what it is. It's a disease, and it all has to be treated. Okay, so, you know, there's usually one, and I was the message barrier once. And I was pretty young. I was 13 when I started driving my mother to AA meetings. And I couldn't go in because I wasn't an alcoholic, and I had to sit outside. And there was an old song that was popular then. It was called "What's Behind the Green Door," and that AA group meeting had a green door, and I always wanted to know, what do they do behind that green door? But what I did, she didn't read her big book, but I would read it. I read it cover to cover, and but I learned that it is or through that, that, you know, when your mother drinks, and it was very shaming. It was very shaming. And so I would try to keep the secret when I'd go to school, and I would make up, this is when you keep secrets, you have to lie. Y'all know that. You have to lie to cover up the secret. And I would lie, and then it's hard to remember a lie. And then I would have to tell another lie to cover up that lie. It was all about keeping the secret about how bad things were in my home. You know, those of us in a 12-step program, you know, when Bill first wrote the big book, and there, you know, and then there was an article that came out in Saturday Evening Post about the AA movement. Everybody in the world thought this is the way we need to live. This is a way of life. Of course, it's right out of the New Testament. They could have got it right out of the New Testament. It is a way to live. And at first they thought, oh, we need to put it in schools. We need to put it in hospitals. We need to put it here. I mean, the whole world needed the 12-step program. That idea didn't last long, because recovery in the 12 steps are not necessarily for those who need it. It's for those who want it. Now, a lot of people could benefit from, I mean, anyone could benefit from the 12 steps, but those of us that have some form of addiction, I think we're pretty special people, particularly if we get to show up in the fellowship and get to be a member of a fellowship that teaches us how to live and how to deal with dishonesty. You know, that's one of the first things that we learn is how you recover. How you recover is honesty, being open, and being willing. That is a pretty simple process, don't y'all think? That's how you recover. Is first thing, you just have to get honest. And I will tell you, when people first get into the program or first get into treatment, we cannot be completely honest because of the fear of what they will think about us, and then the shame. I was very fortunate at one of my very first sponsors, and I've had many, and they've either all died or have Alzheimer's today. You know, that's the thing about getting older, because you have, most of us, or I did, had older people that were sponsoring. Anyway, I won't go into all of that, but it is sad. So, first time I did a 5th step, I was scared to death, because this woman that was going to hear it, she was a nurse, and she was an RN, and she was smart, and she was beautiful, and I had her so high up on a pedestal. You know, I thought she was God, and the way why it could work is because she knew she wasn't. You know, she knew she wouldn't. If she had thought that she was my God, we'd both been in trouble. But anyway, I remember doing that first 5th step, and I kept putting it off, because I had little kids, and I had to do this, and I had to do that. And one day she came out, and she brought someone with her to keep my youngest daughter, and she said, get in the car. I said, where are we going? I had given her my 4th step to go over it, and she said, get in the car and you drive. And so, no, she drove. And she then handed me that 4th step guide, you know, that I had written, and she had me to start giving her my 5th step, and she drove, and I talked, and I cried, and everything I would say, those deep, dark secrets that I didn't want anyone to know, she would just laugh, and she said, well, I've done that same thing. And then she'd tell me a little bit about what she did, and then I'd go to the next thing, and she said, well, it's like we were raised in the same house. And so by the end of that, and this is the beauty of the 12-step program, by the end of it, yes, there was a lot of pain, but there's also a lot of laughter, a lot of healing, to know that there was someone that had done some of the same things that I had done. And that she was someone that I respected, someone that I loved, and that helped me start to build a little bit of self-respect for myself. But it took a while. I had such low self-esteem, it was pathetic. But anyway, alrighty, so that goes to where a burden's shared, when we can share those secrets and a burden, it will cut it at least in half, usually more than that. But when we can share those deep, dark secrets with someone, it can at least cut it in half. And a lot of times when you give it to another person and you have invited God into that, a lot of times all of it will be gone. And if not, then throughout your recovery, little by slow, those layers will be peeled off. But then when you begin to recover and you begin to share joys with people in the program or with your family or with, when you're not so burdened down with secrets and all, and you begin to share the joy of living, that doubles. When you share a joy, it doubles. You've seen that, haven't you, in your life? I got on when Jackie was talking about her beloved Carly. And, just watching her here share about Carly. I mean, can I say something? Okay, all right. When she came here and brought Carly, all we saw was pain. It was pain. It was so much pain. Pain with Jackie, pain with her husband, pain with Carly. And, I'm about to cry now. And now what you're hearing, this is what recovery does. What you're hearing this morning from Jackie is the joy of recovery. Her daughter, who could hardly look at herself in the mirror for the shame that she was carrying, is graduating college. Now, is that a miracle or not? That is, to me, a miracle. And not only that, the journey that we have watched her take, that Carly take, and how she has, that self-esteem has built, and, she's been able to have fun and make friends. Anyway, and that goes for a lot of people on this screen. I've had the privilege of, my job or what I do, my vocation is gives me a front row seat at miracle watching. We see miracles every single day. And if we don't see them while the client's here, we see them later, because a lot of times people will not leave all of the baggage here, and they'll go out, maybe relapse, come back. Maybe they come back 2 or 3 times, but they're still treating the symptoms. And once they get into recovery and acceptance and get, past the shame, then we get to see the change in them and how it goes down into their family and how they have families. So, what we have in a 12-step program, not only do we have a common problem, that's what brings us together, is the problem. Now, you've heard this, it's in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. The people on the Titanic, they had a common problem, and they were bound together as tight as they could be to save themselves to get on shore. It was awful, and many of them died, but some of them reached the shore. Now, I don't think they got to shore and looked around and said, well, it is Tuesday at noon, so let's meet here next Tuesday and talk about our journey. Because, see, the problem was over. Once they reached the shore, they probably had some PTSD. They didn't know about it back then. They probably had some leftover trauma from that. But basically, the problem was over. Now, see, with addictions, guess what? We can live in recovery every day. But if we ever forget that we are addicts, we will relapse in a heartbeat. And that's why we have to keep all of us grouping up together. We have to stay grouped up together and talk about not only the problem, but the solution. We get past the problem. But then, we may not have the problem with the substance or the food. People with eating disorders, ours don't go away that quick. Food addiction, problems with eating disorders, excuse my language, but it is an absolute bitch to treat. Alcoholism, it is difficult, it's absolutely difficult. But once you put that tiger in the cage, if you're a drug addict or an alcoholic, you never have to take that tiger out of the cage again. But for those of us with any form of an eating disorder, we have to take that tiger out and walk him around 3 times a day and maybe a snack in the evening and feed that tiger and then try to get him back in the cage, because once we feed him, he wants more. That sucker never gets enough until we get into recovery. And this is where, people with eating disorders, it's not any substance abuse disorder is nothing to play around with. But I'll tell you, eating disorders, it'll get you in a heartbeat when you think that you're in pretty good recovery like that. It can get you. So that's why we do have to continue in our recovery and keep those, I started Overeaters Anonymous in 1972. And in 1985, September the 19th of 1985, I went to treatment. And I was 100 times worse than I was in 72. I was sick with bulimia so bad that I was, I certainly could have died. I got that bad. But I didn't know that there was a place for folks like us or like me to go. And my point is, the food piece cannot, it has to be dealt with in such a serious way because we deal with the substance every day. And my little husband would always say, when he passed away, he had 32 years of sobriety in AA, and he'd always tell me, he said, now you can talk about me and say anything you want to in your talks about me, but don't forget to sober me up. So I just sobered him up. He was sober when he passed away, 32 years. And he would say, I don't know if I could drink 3 measured drinks, 3 measured drinks of scotch a day. He'd say, how do you do it? How do you eat 3 balanced meals a day and then get up and go and live your life? And, I loved that he felt sorry for me. He did not have to feel sorry for me because I found a way to treat my food addiction. It's the same way that he was treating his alcoholism, but it was more specific. I had to go to a specific group called Overeaters Anonymous and there's Food Addicts Anonymous and there's Eating Disorder Anonymous. We have to get with like kind because otherwise people don't understand. The guys that be guys and gals, but it was mainly the guys. Once they found out I went to treatment for an eating disorder, and we were pretty, we spoke a lot in we were not, there's no stars in the program, but we were, we went around to little towns, my husband and I did, and we would speak as a couple. We were well known in the recovery community. And so when I went to treatment, people thought I had lost my ever-loving mind because no one ever heard of anybody going to treatment for food addiction. They thought I was nuts. And so the old guys, there's one in particular, there's always these, particularly guys in the program that are, and I love the traditions, but they are tradition thumpers, and he would talk to me about, he said, there is no such thing as food addiction. Here, why don't you have one of these candy bars? I always had candy bars sitting on a table. And so I'm saying that to say there's a lot of people who don't understand about food addiction and eating disorders, and they don't have to. Who has to understand are those of us who have it. So I didn't intend to get into all of that, but evidently I needed to. And the thing that is, and I'm going to close with this, the joy that we have in a 12-step program is that we get with like kind who, when we tell them our secrets, they know what we're talking about because they've been there. They don't look at us like we're nuts, or they don't start backing off away from us. You know, I went to many, many therapists, and they were good people, you know. Psychologists had big names and big prices, but not one ever said, you have an eating disorder that is much like the disease of alcoholism. It is an addiction, and that you have a problem, and this is the solution. No one, not one. And that's why we do what we do today, because I want people to know if they're dying from an eating disorder, at least they need to know what they're dying from. Then if they choose not to treat it, it's their business. Okay, I've gotten on my bandstand here, and so I've gone, you know, I do this sometimes. I quit sharing and go to preaching. So anyway, secrets keep us sick, and the truth will set us free. So I got some really long-term, good, short-term, middle-term people in recovery here. So I'd like to hear from some of y'all. And if those of us with eating disorders ever got to tell in an AA meeting some of the stuff that we do with food, it would curl the toenails of alcoholics and drug addicts. They cannot hold a candle to some of the stuff that we do to our bodies. And I mean, I'm certainly not discounting, because I am one, alcoholism and drug addiction, but I'll tell you, the food addiction is a big, big deal, and a lot of people don't want to treat it. So there you go. All right, but I've got people here that treat it. Megan, what do you have to say about the truth will set us free, about keeping secrets? Do you have anything for us today?